The research vessel Horizon Dawn drifted through the empty space beyond the belt, its sensors scanning the darkness for anything unusual. Captain Brandon Mitchell sat in his command chair, watching the displays with tired eyes. They had been out here for 3 months, mapping the uncharted regions where no ship had gone before. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange," Hayes said from the communications station. The young officer leaned forward, her fingers moving across her console. "There's an energy signature about 2 million kilometers ahead. It doesn't match anything in our database." Brandon straightened in his chair. "Can you identify the source?" "Working on it, sir." His face showed concentration as she worked. "Whatever it is, it's big, really big." Dr. Lisa Hammond walked onto the bridge, carrying a data pad. The had spent most of the voyage studying old records of extinct civilizations. She looked at the main screen with interest. "What did we find?" "We don't know yet," Brandon said. "But we're about to find out. Helm, take us closer, nice and slow." The Horizon Dawn changed course, moving toward the mysterious signal. As they got closer, the sensors began to provide more information. The structure was massive, easily 10 kilometers across. It was made of some dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "My God," Lisa whispered. She moved closer to the screen, her eyes wide. "That's not human technology. It's not any technology I recognize from the known species." Lieutenant Sanders entered the bridge, his security uniform crisp and clean. "Are we looking at a potential threat?" "Unknown," Brandon said, "but keep your team ready just in case." The structure grew larger on the screen as they approached. It had a strange design, with repeating patterns that suggested purpose rather than decoration. Long corridors extended from a central core, creating a shape that reminded Brandon of a massive wheel. "I'm seeing what looks like docking ports," said Price, the ship's chief engineer. She had joined the others on the bridge, drawn by the discovery. "And those sections there, they look like they could be cells or containment units." "A prison?" asked. "Maybe," replied. "The design is consistent with that function. Lots of small enclosed spaces, all leading to a central chamber." Lisa was already working on her data pad, comparing the structure to known archaeological sites. "If this is what I think it is, we're looking at something incredibly old. The metal composition, the energy signature, everything points to a civilization that existed millions of years ago." "Millions," said her voice full of wonder. "At least," Lisa confirmed. "Captain, we need to get closer. This could be the most important discovery in human history." Brandon considered the situation carefully. They were far from any backup, alone in uncharted space, but the opportunity was too important to ignore. "All right, but we do this carefully, full sensor scans before we even think about boarding." The Horizon Dawn moved into position near the structure. The sensors worked for hours, mapping every surface, every corridor, every chamber. The data that came back was both fascinating and disturbing. "Captain, you need to see this," Lisa said. She put an image on the main screen. It showed the outer hull of the structure covered in symbols and markings. "These are warnings. I can only translate fragments, but the words I'm getting are concerning. Containment, eternal watch, the unmaking." "The unmaking?" Brandon asked. "What does that mean?" "I don't know," Lisa admitted. "But whatever this place was built to contain, someone wanted to make sure it stayed contained." A door on the bridge opened, and a tall alien entered. Was the Galactic Council's representative on the mission, a member of the Ash species. His scaled skin reflected the light from the displays, and his multiple eyes focused on the structure with interest. "Fascinating," said in his translated voice. "We should begin immediate investigation. The Council will want detailed reports." "With respect," Lisa said, "those warnings suggest we should be cautious. The beings who built this went a great lengths to mark it as dangerous." Made a sound that the translator interpreted as dismissive laughter. "Primitive warnings from extinct species. They lacked our advanced understanding of technology and the universe. We've explored countless ancient sites without incident." Brandon felt uncomfortable with confidence. In his years of exploration, he had learned that ancient warnings usually existed for good reasons. "Dr. Hammond has a point. We should analyze the warnings more thoroughly before we proceed." "Analysis can happen during the investigation," said firmly. "The Council's mandate is clear. We document and study all significant discoveries. This structure represents unknown technology that could benefit the entire galaxy. Moved closer to the captain, speaking quietly. "Sir, I don't like this. Those warnings are there for a reason." "Neither do I," Brandon whispered back, "but has legal authority on matters involving potential Galactic Council interest." Was studying her console, tracking the energy patterns within the structure. "Captain, something interesting. The facility appears to have power. Not much, but enough to maintain life support and basic systems. After millions of years, that's remarkable." "Which means the technology is far beyond our current capabilities," Lisa added. "We should document from a distance and let specialized teams handle any direct investigation." His eyes narrowed. "Humans are always so cautious. Your species fears what it doesn't understand. This is why you remain junior members of the galactic community." Brandon felt anger rise in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "We're careful because we've survived by being careful. Earth taught us that the universe is dangerous." "Then perhaps Earth taught you the wrong lessons," replied. "I'm ordering an away mission. We'll take a shuttle to the structure and begin preliminary surveys." The captain knew he couldn't refuse a direct order from the council representative, but he could control how they proceeded. "Fine, but we do this my way. Full security team, all safety protocols active, and if anything seems wrong, we evacuate immediately." "Agreed," said, though his tone suggested he thought the precautions were unnecessary. 2 hours later, the away team assembled in the shuttle bay. Brandon led the group with Lisa, and joining him, brought two of his own people, both Ash technicians. They wore protective suits and carried scanning equipment. The shuttle detached from the Horizon Dawn and moved toward the ancient structure. As they got closer, noticed something on her displays. "Captain, the structure is reacting to our approach. Power levels are increasing." "Increasing how much?" Brandon asked. "Systems that were dormant are coming online. Lights are activating throughout the facility." Lisa checked her own scanner. "It's like the station is waking up after a long sleep." "Or recognizing that someone is here," added, his hand resting on his weapon. The shuttle approached a docking port on the outer hull. The port was large enough to accommodate their vessel, and surprisingly, it seemed designed for it. The airlocks matched perfectly, as if the ancient builders had anticipated visitors. "That's convenient," said. "Too convenient." "Or they wanted to make it easy for people to enter," suggested. "The question is why." The shuttle docked with a solid clang. The team checked their equipment one final time, then moved to the airlock. Brandon took a deep breath and opened the outer door. The station's airlock opened automatically, revealing a corridor beyond. Lights flickered on, illuminating metal walls that had stood silent for millions of years. The air that flowed in was breathable, recycled and maintained by systems that refused to die. The team stepped into the corridor, their boots making soft sounds on the ancient floor. The walls were covered in more symbols, layer upon layer of text in languages that no longer existed anywhere in the galaxy. Lisa moved to the nearest wall, running her scanner over the symbols. Her face went pale as she read the translation. "Captain, you need to see this." Brandon joined her, looking at the data on her scanner. The translation was incomplete, but the message was clear enough. "We are the 40,000 who chose to remain. We are the eternal wardens. Do not wake the prisoner." The team stood in silence, the weight of the message settling over them. Somewhere deep in this ancient prison, something waited. Something that had needed 40,000 volunteers to guard it, volunteers who had stayed until they died. And now, millions of years later, humans and aliens had come to disturb its sleep. Brandon looked at his team, seeing the concern on every human face. And his technicians seemed unmoved, already moving deeper into the corridor with their scanners active. The captain made a decision. "We proceed but slowly. Everyone stays together, and if I give the order to evacuate, no one argues." They moved forward into the darkness, into a prison built by beings long dead, toward a mystery that ancient civilizations had sacrificed everything to contain. The team moved through the corridors of the ancient prison, their lights cutting through the darkness. Every surface was covered in writing, desperate messages carved into metal by beings who had lived and died here millions of years ago. Lisa stopped at every wall, her scanner working to translate the alien languages. Most of it was fragmentary, pieces of longer messages worn away by time. But the words she could read painted a disturbing picture. "Here's another one," she said, pointing to a section of wall. "It says something about a coalition. 40,000 species came together to build this place." 40,000? Repeated, shocked. "I didn't know that many intelligent species even existed back then." "They probably don't anymore," Lisa said quietly. "At least not in any form we would recognize. Evolution and extinction would have changed them beyond recognition if they survived at all." Kept his weapon ready, his eyes scanning the corridor ahead. What could possibly require 40,000 species to work together? The galactic threats we know about barely get a dozen species to cooperate. "Something worse than we can imagine," Lisa answered. They came to a large chamber filled with what looked like living quarters. Beds lined the walls, thousands of them arranged in neat rows. And on many of those beds lay bodies, perfectly preserved in the cold vacuum that had claimed the station when its atmosphere finally failed. Gasped, covering her mouth. The bodies were alien from dozens of different species. Some were humanoid, others completely unlike anything in the current galactic database. All of them had died in their sleep peacefully, as if they had simply decided not to wake up. "They sealed themselves in," said, examining the chamber's door controls. "Look at this. The doors were locked from the inside. They knew the atmosphere was failing and they chose to stay." Brandon felt a chill run down his spine. They were the wardens. They stayed to guard whatever is in here, even when it meant their deaths. Pushed past the humans, his technicians following. "Interesting specimens for study, but not relevant to our mission. We need to find the central systems, the technology that powered this facility." "With respect," Brandon said, his voice hard, "these aren't specimens. They're people who made an incredible sacrifice. We should treat them with dignity." Turned, his multiple eyes focusing on the captain. "Humans and your emotions. These beings have been dead for millions of years. They're archaeological data now, nothing more." Stepped forward, his jaw tight with anger. "In human culture, we honor the dead, especially those who died protecting others." "How primitive," said dismissively. He continued deeper into the station, his people following without looking back at the chamber of the dead. Brandon exchanged looks with his team. The divide between human values and cold pragmatism was growing wider. "Stay alert," he told them. "I don't trust his judgment." They left the chamber and continued exploring. The station was massive, with layer upon layer of corridors and rooms. They found armories filled with weapons of types they didn't recognize. They found medical bays with equipment designed for species that no longer existed. They found gardens long dead where the wardens had tried to grow food. Every room told the same story. People had lived here, worked here, and eventually died here, all to maintain their eternal watch over something dangerous. Lisa found what she was looking for in a central archive room. The chamber was filled with data storage devices, arranged in circular patterns around a central terminal. "This is it," she said excitedly. "The station's records. If we can access these, we'll learn what this place was really built for." Moved to the terminal, studying its design. "The interface is old, but the underlying principles are similar to what we use now. Give me a few minutes." She worked quickly, her fingers moving over the ancient controls. The terminal responded, lights flickering as systems that had been dormant for eons came back to life. Text began scrolling across the display, fast and incomprehensible. "I'm getting data," said. "Lots of it. The translation matrix is working overtime." Lisa crowded close, reading as the text was translated into human language. Her face went pale as she read, her hands shaking. "Oh no. Oh God, no." "What is it?" Brandon asked, moving to her side. Lisa turned to face him, fear clear in her eyes. "It's a prison record, a detailed account of what they captured and why." She took a breath, steadying herself. "Billions of years ago, there was an entity, not a creature, not in any biological sense, something else, something that existed outside normal reality." "What did it do?" asked. "It consumed civilizations," Lisa continued, reading from the display. "Not by destroying them, but by unmaking them, erasing them from existence. Entire species would vanish, and reality would adjust so that they had never existed at all. The entity fed on existence itself." The team stood in stunned silence. The scale of the threat was beyond anything they had encountered. The records say that thousands of species banded together to fight it, Lisa went on. But you can't kill something that exists outside reality. You can't destroy something that unmakes existence, so they built this prison instead. How asked, how do you imprison something like that? Lisa scrolled through more data. They used a combination of technology and what the records call will binding. They created this station and then bound the entity here through the collective consciousness of the wardens. The 40,000 species each contributed volunteers who linked their minds to the prison systems. Their thoughts, their will to contain the entity, became part of the structure itself. That's why they couldn't leave, said understanding dawning. If they left, the binding would weaken. Exactly, Lisa confirmed. They lived here, generation after generation, maintaining the containment with their minds as much as with technology. When the last of them died, the systems were supposed to keep running on the will they had imprinted into the station itself. Had been listening, his expression unreadable. Fascinating. A combination of psionic power and technology. The Council will be very interested in this discovery. Brandon felt his stomach tighten. We need to leave. Now, this isn't an archaeological site, it's an active containment facility. Don't be absurd, replied. The entity has been imprisoned for millions of years. The danger, if there ever was one, is long past. The wardens didn't think so, Lisa argued. They stayed until they died. They believed the threat was eternal. They were primitives, said dismissively. Advanced as they were for their time, they lacked our understanding of dimensional physics and quantum mechanics. What they feared, we can study safely. You're wrong, said flatly. Sir, we need to evacuate. This is above our pay grade. Brandon agreed, but before he could give the order, moved to another terminal. I'm authorizing a full structural scan. We need to locate the containment chamber and analyze what's actually imprisoned there. No, Lisa shouted, but it was too late. Technicians activated their advanced scanning equipment, sending powerful energy pulses deep into the station's core. The scans were designed to penetrate any shielding, to reveal whatever was hidden. For a moment, nothing happened. Then alarms began to blare throughout the station. The lights flickered, changing from the steady glow they had maintained to a pulsing red. The floor beneath their feet vibrated, and a deep sound echoed through the corridors, too low to hear but felt in their bones. Rushed to the terminal, her fingers flying over the controls. The containment systems are overloading. The scan is interfering with the binding mechanisms. Shut it down, Brandon ordered. I'm trying. Lead technician worked frantically. The equipment isn't responding. It's like something is pulling the scan deeper, forcing it to continue. Lisa grabbed Brandon's arm, her eyes wide with terror. It's awake. After 3 million years of sleep, we just woke it up. The station shuddered, a massive tremor that knocked several team members off their feet. Through the walls, they could hear the sound of ancient machinery activating, systems that had been dormant suddenly roaring to life. Everyone back to the shuttle, Brandon commanded. Move now. They ran through the corridors, the station's alarms screaming around them. Behind them, they could hear doors slamming shut, sealing sections off. The entity, whatever it was asserting control over its prison. They reached a junction and skidded to a halt. The corridor ahead was blocked by a blast door that hadn't been there before. The station was changing, adapting, trapping them inside. This way, shouted, pointing to an alternate route. They ran, taking turns and passages that hadn't been in the original maps had made. The station was reconfiguring itself, and they were lost in a maze that was actively working against them. Checked her communications device. I can't reach the shuttle. Something is jamming our signals. Keep moving, Brandon said. We'll find another way out. They rounded a corner and found themselves in a massive spherical chamber. At its center, suspended in the air, was a cell. It was small, barely large enough for a person, surrounded by machinery that hummed with power. Beams of energy connected the cell to points all around the chamber, creating a web of light. And inside the cell, something moved. It wasn't a creature, not in any sense they understood. It was a distortion, a place where space bent wrong, where reality twisted. Looking at it hurt, like staring at something their brains couldn't process. Several of its technicians collapsed, blood leaking from their noses and ears. The mere sight of the entity was damaging their neural systems. The humans remained standing, though they felt the pressure against their minds. Years of evolution on a dangerous world had prepared them for threats in ways the other species hadn't been. They could look at the impossible and not break. The entity noticed them. Though it had no eyes, they felt its attention focus on them like a physical way. The entity's attention pressed down on them like a physical force. Brandon could feel it probing at his mind, searching for weaknesses, for the cracks it could exploit to break him. Around him, his team stood firm, though he could see the strain on their faces. However, was on his knees. The Ash representative had always been so confident, so sure of his superiority. Now he shook with terror, his multiple eyes unable to look away from the thing in the cell. Bold words from tiny creatures. The entity's meaning rippled through reality. I have consumed galaxies. I have unmade entire timelines. What are you but insects before a storm? We're humans, Brandon said simply, and we don't break easy. The entity seemed to consider this. It reached into their minds, pulling out memories, examining their species' history. Brandon felt the intrusion like cold fingers rifling through his thoughts, but he didn't resist. Let it look. Let it see what Earth had made. The entity saw wars that spanned continents. It saw diseases that killed millions. It saw natural disasters, famines, and all the countless ways humanity had faced extinction. And it saw how humans had survived every single time through stubbornness and determination and the simple refusal to give up. Interesting, death. Your planet tried to kill you, so you learned to fight death itself. The entity's tone held something that might have been respect. But fighting death and fighting me are different things. I am not death. I am the absence of existence. I am the unmaking. We've heard, Lisa said, finding her voice. Her hands were clenched into fists, but she stood straight. The records say you erased entire civilizations, made it so they never existed at all. Yes, the entity's presence expanded, filling the chamber. When I feed, I don't just kill. I consume the very fact of existence. Your species would vanish, and reality would heal around the wound as if you had never been. No one would remember you. No one would mourn you. You would simply stop having ever existed. Made a small sound of fear, but she didn't look away. Moved closer to the captain, his weapon useless but still gripped tightly. Worked her data pad, recording everything, her scientific mind still functioning despite the terror. That's why the 40,000 stayed, Brandon said. They knew if you escaped, you'd erase everyone, not just kill them, but make it so they never lived at all. They were wise to fear me, but they made a mistake. They thought their will could hold me forever. Nothing is forever. The containment machinery sparked, energy arcing between the beams. The systems are failing. In time, I will be free. Perhaps days, perhaps years, but I will escape. Then we'll stop you, said flatly. You, the entity's attention focused on the lieutenant. One human with a primitive weapon. You think you can succeed where 40,000 species failed. If that's what it takes, replied without hesitation. Finally found his voice, though it came out as a whisper. Please, we meant no disrespect. We'll leave. We'll seal this place and make sure no one returns. Just let us go. The entity ignored him, still focused on the humans. You are different from the others. Most species, when they see me, break immediately. Their minds cannot accept what I am. But you Earth creatures look at me and remain sane. Why? Lisa answered, her voice steady. Because we evolved looking at things that wanted to kill us. Predators, diseases, natural disasters. Our pattern recognition is designed to identify threats, not hide from them. We see danger and we face it. And you think that makes you special? The entity's meaning carried dark amusement. It makes you stubborn prey, nothing more. Maybe, Brandon said, but we're prey that learned to hunt back. That's how we survived. That's how we made it to the stars. The entity pulled more memories from their minds, seeing humanity's journey from caves to space stations. It saw the first humans looking up at a sky they couldn't reach and deciding to reach it anyway. It saw nuclear weapons and climate disasters overcome through cooperation and innovation. It saw a species that treated the impossible as merely inconvenient. You believe you can contain me. The entity's presence grew heavier. Let me show you what you face. The chamber changed. Reality bent and twisted. Suddenly they weren't standing in the prison anymore. They were floating in a void, surrounded by ghosts. Millions of them, billions, the shades of civilizations that the entity had consumed. Lisa cried out, seeing cities that had never been, people who had never existed. The ghosts reached for them, mouths open in silent screams, trying to warn them of the fate that awaited. It's not real, Brandon said loudly. It's showing us what it wants us to see, don't let it break you. The entity's laughter was like reality tearing. Not real. These civilizations were as real as you. They lived, they loved, they built wonders, and then I unmade them. Now they exist only in my memory, ghosts of things that never were. This is your future, humans. I will consume you, and you will join them in this void. No, said suddenly. The young communications officer stepped forward, her fear replaced by anger. You're trying to scare us, make us lose hope, but we won't. We can't. It's not in our nature. The entity focused on her, and Brandon saw his knees buckle under the weight of its attention. But she stayed standing, glaring at the distortion that was their enemy. Brave words from a child. What do you know of hope against the eternal darkness? I know that humans have faced extinction dozens of times, replied. Climate shifts, asteroid impacts, supervolcanoes, pandemics. We survived them all, and every time it was because someone refused to give up hope. Your species' history is a moment compared to my existence. I was ancient when your planet was still cooling from formation. I have seen countless species like yours rise and fall. But you've never seen one quite like us, said. Have you? The records said the coalition that imprisoned you represented 40,000 species, but you still seem surprised by humans. The entity went silent for a moment, which was somehow more disturbing than its presence. When it spoke again, its meaning carried something unexpected: curiosity. You are correct. In all my existence, across billions of years and countless galaxies, I have never encountered a species quite like yours. Most intelligent life evolves on safe worlds, protected by parent species or lucky circumstances. They develop technology before they develop strength. But you Earth creatures evolved on a death world, surrounded by things that wanted to kill you, and you became the dominant species anyway. That's right, Brandon said. Earth made us hard. We learned to survive because we had to. And now you think that hardness will save you from me? The entity's presence expanded again, pressing against the containment field. I am not a predator you can fight. I am not a disease you can cure. I am the end of existence itself. Your stubbornness is admirable, but it is meaningless against what I am. Who had been quiet spoke up. But you're still in that cell. For 3 million years you've been trapped. The wardens will held you even after they died. That means you're not unstoppable. The entity's attention snapped to her, and gasped as it invaded her mind more deeply than the others. Brandon saw her sway, blood dripping from her nose, but she stayed conscious. You are right to fear me, engineer. The containment is failing. Your scans accelerated the decay. In time, measured in your hours now instead of your years, I will break free. And when I do, I will consume this galaxy as I have consumed so many others. Unless we stop you, Brandon said. How? The entity seemed genuinely curious. The 40,000 bound me with their collective will, sustained over generations. You are 7 humans and 3 dying aliens. What can you possibly do? Whatever it takes, answered. The entity laughed again, and the sound made the chamber shake. Then let me make you an offer, Death. I find you interesting, unique. I would hate to unmake something so rare. Free me from this prison, and I will spare your species. I will consume every other civilization in this galaxy, but humanity will remain. You can have all the stars to yourselves. The team exchanged looks. It was, in a terrible way, a generous offer. Survive at the cost of every other species in the galaxy. Brandon didn't hesitate. No. No, the entity's surprise was genuine. You would condemn your own species to protect aliens. Species you barely know. Species like this one, whose representative led you into this trap with his arrogance. Yes, Brandon said firmly. Because that's what humans do, we protect the innocent. All innocents, not just our own. You are fools. Your nobility will be your death. Maybe, Lisa said. But it's a death we choose. We're not going to sacrifice millions of innocent lives to save ourselves. That would make us monsters. Then you will die with everyone else. The entity's meaning carried finality. I tire of this conversation. You interest me, humans, but not enough to keep me from feeding. I am hunger without end. I am the void that consumes all things, and soon, very soon, I will be free. The chamber snapped back to normal. They were standing in the containment room again, the entity still trapped in its cell. But the machinery around it sparked and groaned, overloading. The binding was breaking down faster now. Struggled to his feet, his face twisted with terror and rage. You fools, you could have saved us, saved everyone, but your human arrogance, your need to be heroes, you've doomed us all. turned on him, his patience finally breaking. Our arrogance? You're the one who insisted on scanning the prison. You're the one who woke this thing up. We tried to warn you, but you wouldn't listen because you thought you were superior to humans. Enough, Brandon commanded. Fighting among ourselves helps no one. We need to focus on getting out of here and finding a way to keep that thing contained. How? Asked. The systems are failing. We don't have the knowledge to repair them, and we certainly don't have the psionic abilities the wardens used. Then we find another way, Brandon said. We're humans, we don't know how to give up. The entity's presence filled the chamber one more time. That stubbornness will be your legacy, humans. When I unmake you, when I consume you from existence, that refusal to surrender will be the last thing to go. I will savor it. We'll see about that, Brandon replied. The team retreated to a secure section of the station, a control room that had once housed the warden's monitoring equipment. Sealed the door behind them while Lisa and worked to establish communication with the Horizon Dawn. Still jammed, reported, frustration clear in her voice. Whatever that thing is doing, it's blocking all our signals. Brandon paced the small room, his mind racing. They were trapped on a failing prison with an entity that could unmake reality itself and no way to call for help. Every instinct told him to evacuate immediately, but he knew that wasn't enough. If they left without securing the containment, that thing would eventually break free. Stood guard at the door, watching the monitors that showed empty corridors. For now, the entity seemed content to wait in its cell, but that could change at any moment. Sat in a corner, his earlier confidence completely shattered. His two remaining technicians huddled near him, all three too traumatized to be much help. All right, Brandon said, stopping his packing. Let's assess what we know. Talk to me about the containment systems. Pulled up schematics on her data pad. The prison uses a combination of technology and something else. The wardens called it will binding. Basically, they used their consciousness, their determination to contain the entity, and wove it into the station's structure. Like a psychic field? Asked. More than that, Lisa explained. They made their will to contain it part of the physical reality of the prison. The technology channels and amplifies that will, but the will itself is what actually holds the entity. And that's what's failing, Brandon said. The wardens are dead, their will faded over time. Exactly, confirmed. The machinery can run on its own, but without consciousness directing it, it's just going through the motions. The entity has been able to slowly erode the binding over millions of years. Turned from his post, so we need to provide new consciousness, new will to strengthen the containment. In theory, yes, Lisa said carefully. But the wardens numbered in the thousands and they maintained the binding for generations. We're 7 people. 6, said bitterly. I'm not linking my mind to anything after what I saw in that chamber. Brandon ignored him. Could it work? Could a smaller number of people maintain the containment, at least temporarily? And Lisa exchanged looks. Maybe, said slowly. If the person was strong-willed enough, the system is designed to amplify consciousness. One determined mind might be able to hold it, at least for a while. How long is a while? Asked. Days, weeks, shrugged helplessly. We don't have enough data. The wardens maintained it across lifetimes, but they did it together. A single person would have to bear the entire weight of the binding alone. The implications settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Someone would have to stay behind, linking their consciousness to the prison systems, holding the entity in place until they died. There has to be another way, said quietly. If there is, we haven't found it, Lisa replied. The entity was right about one thing. The containment is failing rapidly. Our scans accelerated the decay. We have maybe 12 hours before it breaks completely. Brandon looked at his team. We could try to destroy it, overload the reactor, blow the whole station. It won't work, said. I already ran the calculations. The explosion would definitely kill us, but the entity exists partially outside normal space. The wardens tried to destroy it and failed. That's why they built this prison instead. So our options are let it escape and doom the galaxy, or someone stays behind to maintain the containment, summarized. That's about it, Lisa confirmed. Silence fell over the room. Brandon knew what had to happen next, but he dreaded it. As captain, he should be the one to make the sacrifice, but he also knew he needed to survive to warn the galaxy about what they'd found here. I'll do it, said suddenly. I volunteer to stay. No, Brandon started, but cut him off. Sir, with respect, you need to make it back. Someone has to report what happened here to make sure no one else makes a mistake. Glanced at the cowering alien with disgust. I can do this. I'm trained to face threats. This is just another mission. I'll stay, said, her voice shaking but determined. I'm the youngest. I have the most years to hold it. No, Lisa said firmly. You have your whole life ahead of you. I'm older. I've seen more. I should be the one. Brandon felt his heart breaking as his team argued over who would sacrifice themselves. This was what humanity was at its core. When faced with impossible choices, they stepped forward instead of back. Everyone stop, he said, his voice commanding attention. We're not going to debate this. We're going to do it fairly. He pulled out a small container from his equipment pack, the kind used for collecting samples. We'll draw lots. Everyone who's willing to volunteer puts their name in. We draw one, that's who stays. Captain protested. That's an order, Lieutenant, Brandon said. This way, no one has to carry the weight of choosing who lives and who dies. Fate decides. Slowly, reluctantly, the team agreed, tore paper into strips. Each person wrote their name and folded it, dropping it into the container. Even's technicians contributed, though himself refused. Brandon shook the container, his hands steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. This was the hardest decision he'd ever made as a captain. One of his people would die here, alone, in the dark, fighting a mental battle against something that wanted to unmake reality itself. He reached into the container and pulled out a slip of paper. His hands shook as he unfolded it. Sanders. The lieutenant nodded slowly, accepting his fate without complaint. All right then, let's do this. Said, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Don't be, said gently. Someone has to do it, might as well be me. He looked at Brandon. You'll tell my family I died protecting people, right? I'll tell them the truth, Brandon promised. That you died saving the entire galaxy. That works too, said with a weak smile. And Lisa worked quickly, studying the warden systems to understand how to interface with the containment network. The technology was ancient but functional. They would need to connect him to a neural interface in the central control chamber, the same room where the entity was held. Once you're connected, your consciousness will merge with the station systems, Lisa explained as they prepared. You'll be able to feel the entity constantly, pressing against the binding. You'll have to maintain your will to contain it, never wavering, never giving in. How long can I hold it? Asked. We don't know, admitted. The strain will be enormous, days, maybe weeks. Your body will weaken as your mind focuses on the containment. Eventually. Eventually I'll die, finished. I understand. They made their way back to the central chamber, the team moving through corridors that felt different now. The station knew what was coming. It was preparing for its new warden. The entity waited in its cell, the distortion that marked its presence seeming larger than before. It noticed them immediately. So you return, have you come to free me? We've come to make sure you stay in that cell, Brandon said. The entity probed their minds, understanding their plan. Amusing. One human to replace 40,000 wardens. Your arrogance knows no bounds. It's not arrogance, said, stepping forward. It's duty. Duty, the entity's meaning carried mockery. Noble words. But duty doesn't protect against the erosion of will. I will assault your mind every moment of every day. I will show you horrors beyond imagining. I will break you human just as I broke countless others before you. Maybe acknowledged, but I'm going to make you work for it. Guided to the control station at the center of the chamber. The neural interface looked like a chair surrounded by machinery, cables and sensors designed to connect a mind to the vast systems of the prison. Sat down and began attaching the connections. Each one clicked into place with finality. There would be no going back once the interface activated. Ready? Asked quietly. Took a deep breath. Do it. She activated the system. The machinery hummed to life, and its body went rigid as his consciousness expanded into the station network. His eyes went wide, seeing things that existed beyond normal perception. The team watched monitors that showed the containment field strength. It had been falling steadily since they'd arrived, the percentage dropping toward critical levels. But as mind merged with the systems, the numbers stabilized. The field strengthened. The binding held. Gasped, his hands gripping the chair arms. I can feel it. God, I can feel it pushing against me. It's so strong. "Can you hold it?" Brandon asked urgently. "Yes," said through gritted teeth. "I can hold it. It's not easy, but I can hold it." The entity's presence focused entirely on now. "So, human, you are my new warden. Let us see how long your determination lasts. I have eternity. You have only the span of one short life. I will break you." His laugh was strained, but genuine. "You can try, but you've never met someone from Earth before. We don't break easy. We've been fighting things that want to kill us since we lived in caves. You're just another monster." The entity's rage was palpable. "I am not a monster. I am the void. I am the unmaking. I am eternal." "And I'm a human with a job to do," replied. "I'll keep you in that cell until I die. And when they find this place in 1,000,000 years, there'll be another human who'll do the same. We don't give up. We never give up." Brandon felt pride surge through him, mixed with grief. This was humanity at its best and its worst. The willingness to sacrifice for others, the stubborn refusal to accept defeat, even when victory seemed impossible. The journey back to the shuttle felt longer than the initial exploration. The station seemed to resist their departure, corridors shifting subtly, forcing them to take longer routes. But eventually they reached the docking bay where their shuttle waited. As they climbed aboard, looked back at the dark corridors. "He's still in there, alone with that thing." "He's not alone," Lisa said softly. "He's with the 40,000 who came before, all the wardens who gave their lives to hold that entity. He's part of something bigger now." The shuttle detached from the station and moved away. On the monitors, they could see the vast structure receding into the darkness. Somewhere inside, Sanders fought a battle that no one would ever see, holding back a threat that most of the galaxy didn't even know existed. As they approached the horizon dawn, communication finally cleared. The ship's crew had been trying to reach them for hours, growing increasingly worried when the away team didn't respond. "Captain Mitchell, what happened down there?" the duty officer asked over the radio. "We detected massive energy spikes and then total communications blackout." "Prepare a secure briefing room," Brandon ordered. "What I have to tell you isn't for general broadcast." Once aboard the Horizon Dawn, Brandon gathered his senior staff while the away team cleaned up and received medical attention. And his technicians were placed in a secure room, though the Ash representative was too broken to be a flight risk. In the briefing room, Brandon explained everything. The ancient prison, the entity that unmade reality, the 40,000 species who had sacrificed themselves to contain it. And Sanders, now the warden, holding back the darkness alone. The ship's officers listened in stunned silence. The scale of the threat was beyond anything they'd encountered. "We need to report this to Earth immediately," the duty officer said. "The Galactic Council needs to know." "No," Brandon said sharply. Everyone looked at him in surprise. "If we tell the Council, they'll send ships, scientists, researchers, all eager to study this discovery, and we'll have exactly what happened to us happen again. Someone will make a mistake, and that thing will break free." "But we can't just ignore it," Lisa protested. "The entity is imprisoned but won't live forever. Someone needs to know the truth." Brandon had been thinking about this during the shuttle ride. "We quarantine the sector. Tell the Council it's contaminated with an unknown biological threat, and his technicians died from exposure along with Lieutenant Sanders. The station is too dangerous to approach." "A lie," said quietly. "A necessary one," Brandon replied. "The galaxy isn't ready for the truth. Look at what's arrogance almost caused. The Galactic Council thinks they've seen everything, that their technology can handle any threat. They're wrong." Nodded slowly. "If we tell them about an entity that unmakes reality, they'll want to study it, try to understand it, use it as a weapon, maybe. Human history is full of warnings about tampering with things we don't understand." "So we bury it," Brandon decided. "But we do send a full report to Earth's military command, classified, highest level. If humanity is going to be responsible for guarding this thing, our leaders need to know why." Over the next several hours, they worked on their cover story. The reports were carefully crafted, mixing truth with necessary deception. The station was marked as a biological hazard zone. Death was recorded as an accident during initial investigation. Sanders was listed as killed by pathogen exposure. Only the classified report to Earth told the real story. Brandon wrote it himself, every detail of what they'd found, what they'd faced, and what had done. He recommended that Earth establish a covert watch on the sector, ensuring that if anyone approached the prison, humans would be there to stop them. Days passed as the Horizon Dawn made its way back towards civilized space. The crew went through the motions of their duties, but everyone was affected by what had happened. They'd encountered something that challenged their understanding of reality itself. Spent her off hours composing a message to family. She wanted to tell them the truth about their son's heroism, but she couldn't. Instead, she wrote about his courage, his dedication to protecting others, his willing sacrifice. Every word was true, just carefully phrased to hide the real nature of his mission. Lisa compiled her archaeological data, creating two versions. The public version mentioned an ancient facility of unknown purpose, consistent with the contamination story. The classified version detailed everything about the wardens, the entity, and the binding that held it. Reviewed the technical scans, trying to understand the technology they'd encountered. The combination of machinery and consciousness was beyond current understanding, but she documented what she could. Maybe someday, humanity would need that information. Brandon himself spent time in his quarters, staring at the stars through the viewport. He thought about wondering how long the lieutenant could hold out. Days, weeks. The uncertainty was agonizing. A month after their escape, they received a coded transmission. It took hours to decrypt, and when they did, they found it was from. He'd managed to send a brief message through the station systems. Still here, still holding. It's harder than I thought, but I'm managing. Don't worry about me. Just make sure no one comes back. Brandon showed the message to the team, cried with relief. Lisa smiled through her tears, immediately began analyzing the transmission, trying to find a way to send a reply. They couldn't. The entity's influence was too strong. Any attempt to communicate might weaken concentration. They had to be content knowing he was alive and still fighting. They reached Earth 3 months after leaving the prison. Brandon was immediately summoned to a secure facility where military command waited. He spent 2 days in debriefing, explaining everything multiple times to increasingly senior officers. The response was exactly what he'd hoped for. Earth's government took the threat seriously. A special unit was formed, staffed entirely by volunteers who understood the implications of their mission. They would maintain surveillance on the quarantine zone, ready to intervene if necessary. The unit's motto, suggested by one of the officers who'd read Brandon's report, was simple: "We stand watch." The Galactic Council accepted the contamination story without much question. His death was ruled as negligence, his arrogance having led to a tragic accident. The sector was officially quarantined, with Earth volunteering to maintain the restriction. The Council was happy to let humans handle such an unpleasant duty. 6 months after the mission, Brandon attended a memorial service for Sanders. The ceremony was held at a military cemetery with full honors. His family was there, his mother crying silently as the honor guard performed their duties. Brandon spoke, his words carefully chosen. Sanders died protecting others. He faced a threat that most people will never understand, and he did so willingly, without hesitation. He was a hero in the truest sense of the word. Every word was true. His family would never know the full story, but they knew their son had been brave. That would have to be enough. After the ceremony, Brandon stood alone at the grave marker. It was a stone monument, like thousands of others in the cemetery. But unlike the others, the person it commemorated wasn't actually buried there. Was still out in the void, still fighting, still holding back the darkness. "I hope you can hear me somehow," Brandon said quietly. "I want you to know that we didn't forget, we'll never forget, and we're making sure that when your watch ends, someone else will be ready to take your place." A year passed, then 2. The surveillance unit maintained their watch, monitoring the sector from a safe distance. They detected no unusual activity. The prison remained stable. But they knew it wouldn't last forever. Eventually, strength would fail. His will would falter. And when that happened, humanity would need to be ready to send another volunteer. The unit began quiet recruitment, looking for people with the right combination of mental strength and selfless dedication. They found them easily. Humanity had never lacked for heroes willing to stand against the dark. 5 years after the mission, Dr. Lisa Hammond published a paper about ancient civilizations and the importance of respecting warnings from the past. It became required reading at universities across human space. She never mentioned the prison directly, but her message was clear. Sometimes, the ancients knew what they were doing. Price used her experience to develop new safety protocols for deep space exploration. Her guidelines emphasized caution when approaching ancient or unknown structures. They were adopted by Earth's fleet and slowly spread to other species. Hayes continued her career in communications, eventually becoming a captain herself. She made sure that every officer under her command understood the importance of listening to warnings, of not letting arrogance override caution. And Brandon Mitchell retired from active exploration, taking a position training new captains. He told them about the dangers of space, about the unknown threats that lurked in the dark. He never mentioned the prison, but his students learned to approach the universe with both curiosity and respect. 10 years after the mission, the surveillance unit detected a change in the prison's energy signature. It was subtle, a slight fluctuation that could have been anything, but they knew what it meant. Swatch was ending. The unit activated their emergency protocols. A new volunteer was selected, briefed, and prepared. They would go to the prison, enter as replacement, and continue the eternal vigil. The volunteer's name was a young soldier who had grown up hearing stories about Sanders. He knew what he was signing up for. He accepted it willingly. As prepared for his one-way mission, Brandon came to see him. The former captain was older now, his hair gray, but his eyes were still sharp. "You don't have to do this," Brandon told him. "We can find another way." "No, sir," replied. "Someone has to stand watch. Sanders taught us that. I'm honored to follow his example." Brandon shook his hand, feeling the same pride and grief he'd felt a decade ago. "Then go with our gratitude. The galaxy will never know what you've done, but humanity will remember." Boarded his ship and departed for the prison. The journey took weeks, but he didn't hesitate. When he arrived, the station was exactly as Brandon had described it. Dark, ancient, and holding a secret that could destroy the galaxy. He made his way to the central chamber. There in the warden's chair sat Sanders. The lieutenant was alive, but barely. His body had wasted away, sustained only by the station systems. But his eyes were alert, his will still firm. "You came," said, his voice weak but clear. "Of course," replied. "It's time for you to rest." They made the transition carefully, procedures guiding them. As consciousness merged with the station systems, so was finally allowed to withdraw. For the first time in 10 years, Sanders was free from the entity's constant assault on his mind. "How did you do it?" asked, feeling the pressure of the entity already building. "How did you hold it for so long?" Smiled, his face peaceful for the first time in a decade. "I thought about Earth, about home, about the people I was protecting. Every time the entity tried to break me, I reminded it that humans don't quit. We never quit." "I'll remember that," promised. Died 3 days later, his body finally giving out now that his mind was no longer sustaining it. Buried him in the station's memorial chamber, alongside the 40,000 wardens who had come before. Sanders took his place among heroes. And began his watch, another human standing against the darkness, holding back a threat that most beings would never comprehend. He sat in the warden's chair, feeling the entity rage against the binding, and he smiled. "Come on then," he said to the entity. "Let's see if you can break a human. We've been fighting monsters since we lived in caves. You're just another nightmare." The entity's fury was palpable, but the containment held. Another human stood watch. Another guardian kept the darkness at bay. And somewhere on Earth, in a secure facility, the surveillance unit continued their mission. They would watch, they would wait, and when the time came, they would send another volunteer, and another, and another. Forever, if necessary. Because that's what humans do. They protect the innocent, even from threats the innocent don't know exist. They stand watch in the darkness so others can sleep safely. They face the impossible and refuse to break. The ancient prison drifted in the void, silent and forgotten by most of the galaxy. But inside, a human sat vigilant, maintaining an eternal guard. The 40,000 species who built the prison had died out long ago, their sacrifice forgotten. But humanity remembered. Humanity honored that sacrifice by continuing it. And as long as humans existed, there would always be someone willing to stand watch, to hold back the darkness, to say no to the monsters that wanted to unmake reality itself. The entity learned what Sanders had told it 10 years earlier. You could break a lot of things, but you couldn't break a human who had something to protect. And humans would always have something to protect. They would stand watch forever. Because in the end, that's what being human meant. facing the darkness and refusing to let it win, no matter the cost. "Sir," said quietly, "we need to go. The station is stable now, but we should evacuate while we can." Brandon nodded, knowing she was right, but leaving here felt like abandoning him. "Lieutenant Sanders," he said formally, "thank you for your service." "Just doing my job," Captain said. His voice was already strained, the mental effort of holding the entity visible on his face. "Now get out of here. Make sure no one else makes the mistake of coming back." The team moved toward the exit, but Brandon paused for one last look at. The lieutenant sat in the warden's chair, alone except for the entity that raged against him, holding back the darkness through sheer force of will. It was the most human thing Brandon had ever seen. He looked at his team, seeing determination on every face despite the fear. They were trapped in an ancient prison with a horror beyond comprehension, facing a threat that had defeated 40,000 species working together. The odds were impossible. But they were humans, and humans specialized in beating impossible odds. "Let's get to work," Brandon said. "We've got a monster to keep in its cage." And for the first time in 3 million years, it spoke. Not with sound, but by changing reality around them to form meaning. "Hungry, so hungry. The 40,000 are gone, their will is broken. Who are you to stand before me?" Brandon Mitchell, captain of Earth, stepped forward. His legs shook, but he kept his voice steady. "We're the people who are going to make sure you stay in that cell." Behind them, unnoticed, more lights continued to activate throughout the vast structure. Deep in its core, in a chamber that had been dark for 3 million years, something stirred in its dreamless sleep. The long silence was ending. Visitors had come at last,